Hey guys, how's it going? A lot of you were asking, so I thought I would do another haul video. And so, here's some news. It's been 300 days since the president was sworn in as President of the United States of America, which is a country whose president was sworn in as president, and that president is him. And it's been 300 days, so we thought we would take a look at President Donald Trump's contract with the American voter, his 100-day promises. Because, as Representative Paul Ryan says,
the president's new at this.
So we figured we'd grade him on a curve. And sure, he's new at this was in reference to the president asking the FBI director to drop an investigation into his national security advisor, an unregistered foreign agent of Turkey. But it applies to the president generally. So we're going to cut him some slack. And also acknowledge that, all politicians lie and make promises they don't keep.
I'm not a politician.
Well, even so. We're fair and balanced here. So let's all get wet from horniness and dive face first into the 100-day action plan to make America great again, Donald Trump's contract with the American voter. Section 1. 6 measures to clean up the corruption and special interest collusion in Washington, D.C. Seems like a good idea. Imagine if the president didn't divest from his global organization and was violating the emoluments clause of the Constitution and making money off of his private resorts and his hotel literally down the street from the White House. And imagine a cabinet head abusing travel expenses. And imagine the president hired an incompetent real estate developer who owes literally more than $1 billion to foreign lenders and lied on his security clearance form several times and yet still has security clearance and is also the son-in-law of the president and senior advisor to the president. And imagine a spokeswoman for the White House advertising for the president's daughter's fashion line, or more cabinet members abusing travel expenses. And imagine the president gave many cabinet positions to completely unqualified donors who have ties to lobbying firms and special interests and participate in blatant cronyism. But also, imagine those things occurring last year, and then a dude's like, hey, here are 6 measures to clean up the corruption and special interest collusion in Washington, D.C. You'd be like, yeah, all right, get in there, guy, do it. So, good category. Let's get started. Promise the first. Propose a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on all members of Congress. Now, it's no secret that I respectfully disagree with a lot of our good-brained president's ideas, but this isn't a bad idea. Sure, an argument could be made that maybe Congress people need time to learn and really be effective at the job.
The president's new at this.
And if they're bad at it, vote them out. If they redraw districts to have a stranglehold on seats, vote them out. But term limits for Congress do seem like a good idea that most people who aren't in Congress could get behind. Congress is full of cowards and ghouls. Their approval rating is 13%, which is low. And the average time spent in Congress has steadily increased for hundreds of years. When you're in Congress, you have to constantly be worried about re-election and pleasing donors and lobbyists. It's hard to truly be yourself, to fight for what you believe. It took Jeff Flake not running for re-election to get him to say, you guys, I don't know about this Trump guy. Nancy Pelosi will talk about how she used to carry single-payer signs as party chair of California, but she doesn't believe it's practical now that she's in power. When Congress is bipartisan, they either introduce a bad idea and vote it through, like starting wars or easing banking regulations put in place after the, financial crisis, or they introduce a good idea and vote it down, like rejecting an attempt to take back the war authorization given to the president after 9/11. Ever heard of it? So maybe term limits are a good idea, and it is the president's official first promise on his contract with American voters. And it has been 300 days out of 100 days. So how's it going? Oh, literally not at all? Nothing is going on? It's just not going? Okay. That's right. He has not said a single word about term limits for Congress. At all. The most recent time anyone associated with the president's agenda talked about term limits was last November when Mitch McConnell said, I would say we have term limits now. They're called elections, which, yep, bye Mitch, and it will not be on the agenda in the Senate. I don't know, Mr. President Trump, sir, it seems pretty weak to let him push you around on your first promise. He doesn't even have a shell. You could squish him. Maybe it's just too complicated for you, though, because it would require a constitutional amendment, and the only person who's written up a version of such an amendment is Ted Theodore Cruz, a man who, when called by his real name, Raphael, would say, "Please, call me Ted." His amendment has little support but for a few Republican senators, but that may speak less to the quality of the idea or legislation and more to the fact that literally everyone in Washington, D.C. hates Ted Cruz. Cruz's amendment, which I assume is moist, calls for a maximum of 3 terms for representatives, so 6 years, which actually seems too limited, but it's okay, it's a draft. All right, what's next? 2-term limit for senators, it's 12 years, it seems reasonable. Okay, all right, Ted, bring it home in Section 3, which reads, "No term beginning before the date of the ratification of this article shall be taken into account in determining eligibility for election or appointment under this article." Ha, 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 ha. F you, Ted Cruz. Paul Ryan is in his 10th term. You fucking bunch of goddamn Eddie Munster clones heading into your first day as co-managers of a bread factory. Oh, so yeah, it's a petty joke junction. And you know what? Real quick new segment we'll call Petty Point Prison. Ted, in each only 2-sentence section, you use the phrase "for purposes of this section." And yeah, no shit, man. You're bad at writing laws. Anyway, the only time Trump has ever tweeted the words term limits was in 2015 when he retweeted a person who said the only person who shouldn't have term limits is President Trump, to which he added, "cute." So, grade-wise, for this promise, I'd say C for cute. Promise the second, a hiring freeze on all federal employees to reduce federal workforce through attrition, exempting military, public safety, and public health. Now, President Trump put a 90-day hiring freeze in effect and then canceled it 10 days early because he needed to hire people to work for the government. And despite complaining about all of the positions Congress hasn't approved, he doesn't remember that he also hasn't nominated a lot of them. At his 100-day mark, even though he had fewer confirmations, he had the highest percentage of confirmations to nominations made of any president in this millennium. So, way to go! Merry Christmas! At the 200-day mark, Trump's lead went down significantly, with both W and Obama having about 71% of their nominees confirmed, and him at just below 45%. So, happy holidays. But this is important to note, in the interest of our official slogan at Some News, which is fair and balanced, TMCR. A lot of the media consistently blames Trump for not nominating enough people, and that's why his number of confirmations is so low. Now, this is partly true, but the rate at which Trump has nominated people is lower than Obama's, and his rate was lower than Bush's. So, at least in terms of the 21st century, the rate of nomination has decreased with each subsequent presidency. But at the times when Bush and Obama had made 267 nominations, they had 130 and 151 confirmations respectively, and Trump only had 61. But also, then that number quickly jumped up to 124 after Congress finished up failing to repeal Obamacare. The first or second time, I don't want to look it up. Probably not the other times. Also, Trump's made excuses that he just doesn't want to fill those positions, saying, "What do all these people do? You don't need all those jobs." The jobs president. But anyway, to be really fair, a lot of Trump's nominations are also taking longer because so many of his nominees suck. Like Betsy DeVos, a former teacher, no, she's a GOP donor, a daughter of a billionaire, chairwoman of a private investor WinQuest group, and then suddenly nominee for Secretary of Education. Or Stephen Mnuchin, Secretary of Treasury, home foreclosurer, and satire killer. Or the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development from Stuck on You fame. Or the Secretary of State, a former oil tycoon impossibly named Rex Tillerson, who is also trimming down the State Department significantly, alarming the State Department. Or the Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, a D student who literally didn't know what the Department of Energy did, though to be fair, he did get an A in World Military Systems, and one in a class called Improv of Learning. But to be balanced, he's also a comer, the president's words.
Rick Perry, watch him. He's a comer.
So, in regards to his second promise, I'd say an F for fair and a C for the second C in balanced TMCR. Promise the third, a requirement that for every new federal regulation, 2 existing regulations must be eliminated. And he's certainly doing that. And even though he actually has the slowest increase in regulation restrictions of any president in modern history, he is getting rid of regulations, which are things he seems to blindly resent because a regulation is an easy, vague thing to hate and rail against for hindering businesses, while forgetting that they also save lives. Grenfell Tower burned because those pesky regulations weren't met. They're often in place because of ethical reasons or, public safety reasons. For example, Trump has tried to undo the limits on greenhouse gas emissions, but is finding it hard because of a twice upheld Supreme Court decision that greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, quote, threaten the public health and welfare of current and future generations. But don't worry, he's still busy lifting a ban on offshore drilling, allowing power plants to dump arsenic, lead, mercury, and cadmium in rivers, lakes, and streams, and are setting a proposed ban on chlorpyrifos, a pesticide that causes neurological damage in children. Also rolling back regulations on banks, protections for students against predatory loan practices, protections for trans and disabled students, rolling back the regulation allowing consumers to sue banks, and soon to be reversing a ban on the import of elephant trophies from Africa. So, Merry Christmas, Don Jr. I guess for this promise, the president gets an A for, Promise the fourth, a 5-year ban on White House and congressional officials becoming lobbyists after they leave government service. And he did this via executive order, so he gets an A. For also, though, it doesn't apply to congressional officials, just the White House, and it merely extends an Obama rule that banned the practice for 2 years. So it's sort of just an empty attempt at seeming like you care about ethics and draining the swamp. The insecure, spiteful dopes version of doing something, shouting, "What my perceived enemy did, but more of it, and also worse." Because Trump's +3 version only bans White House officials from lobbying their former agency specifically, not from becoming lobbyists. And it allows people who lobbied the previous year to become White House officials, which was banned by Barack Hussein Obama's executive order, which also banned former White House officials from contacting their former agencies for 2 years, which Trump reduced to 1. So yeah, like I said, he gets a A. Promise the fifth. A lifetime ban on White House officials lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, which he did. He signed the executive order, promise kept. Ignoring that his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, actively looked for such work in Albania and Kosovo, his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, was indicted by the FBI for, among other things, being an unregistered foreign agent, and his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was also an unregistered foreign agent. National security advisor. F***ing C-, I guess. Promise the sixth. A complete ban on foreign lobbyists raising money for American elections. Now, foreign nationals are already banned from donating to American elections, but citizens who are lobbying for foreign interests aren't, though they do have to disclose their relationships and any financial interest to the government. Now, even if he definitely only promised this because the Clinton campaign accepted money from some and he announced this promise a week after that info was released via WikiLeaks, it does seem like a reasonable thing to ban, sure. Though, some critics say that banning them from donating to American elections could cause citizens to just not disclose their relationships with other nations. And sure, I wish I could think of some examples of citizens who didn't disclose their financial and political relationships with other countries, but I'm looking this way, so... Also, it doesn't matter. Trump has done literally nothing about this. Maybe he's busy, maybe he forgot, maybe he doesn't want people to bring up his crime people, maybe he knows that in the future he'll want to accept donations from people he knows who are foreign lobbyists. But regardless of the reason, he gets an F for fun or finished, because fun, we're finished with part 1? How long is this goddamn contract? Ugh. How much have we done? Ugh. See you next time. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And some more of that haul video. Here's a leaf, and here is a leaf, and here's a leaf, and here's a leaf. Oh my God! Happy holidays! Thanksgiving.